The politics of wealth are shifting fast, no longer just about accumulating riches, but also about how you use them. This is the new world wealth era, and it's about value, not just about volume. For more, we're joined by Dr. Steven Enticott from CIA Tax, also the host of the Money Minute and Money Matters segment here on Ticker. Great to see you, sir.
Good to be on. What's that famous saying, Ahron? Don't get between a politician.
Well, and a bucket of cash. And the issue is, of course, is that right now they've spent so much money that these are desperate times that will be calling for desperate measures.
Yeah, and that's right, because, you know, productivity has fallen, so there's left revenue out there for them to tax and to grab hold of. But, you know, the old adage of, oh, well, if we can't tax it or take it, we'll just borrow it.
It seems that the problem begins with 3-year cycles, right? So they have to, it's a constant talent quest to be able to get them over the line each 3 years. You think about the UK, where the 5-year terms mean that they can bring in a period of instability for a while at the beginning, where they can bring money back and cut costs, knowing that they've got a few years to make it up once it turns around. Here, we're just on this constant path to win votes.
That's right, and to borrow as much as we can. And as we're seeing in America, they're now spending more paying their debt than they are paying their military. So we're going to see this as a global problem, especially in Europe. It's already happening. Canada, Australia, it's starting to come.
I remember up to 10 years ago, government debt was a no-no, particularly after the 90s. The Keating recession Australia had to have. Here in Victoria, you know, the joke was, what's the capital of Victoria? 20 cents. And it just got worse. Teachers couldn't be paid, nurses couldn't be paid, police couldn't be paid, marchers, protests in the street, and we just went off debt. The idea was have surpluses in government. What's happened?
Well, it was happening already. You know, lending became easier and easier and more normal for governments to do that. And I believe COVID accelerated. I mean, JobKeeper's got to be the worst policy of all time.
Which was a Liberal policy.
Absolutely. It doesn't seem to matter who's in charge, Liberal or Labor at the moment. If there's a bucket of money, if the Reserve Bank says, hey, it's a good idea to put a bit more money into the system, you have it, a politician's going to take it every single time. The problem is we're actually reaching the limits of what we can actually borrow and have, you know, sensible government around it. So they've got to come after something else. And we know this. We're all acknowledging the problem. I think when we've got a problem, we've got to acknowledge it. They are running out of money and they are going to come for ours. So as a chaplain, as well as a finance man, I always say, acknowledge the problem. The problem's there. Okay, accept it. That's what's going to happen. They're coming after your wealth in any way they possibly can, and exempting themselves, as we've seen with the $3 million tax. But if we acknowledge it and accept it, then we can work to improve it. And that's what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be positive. They are coming. Don't think that the last 30 years of wealth creation is going to be the same as the next 30 years. We're in a very different realm. So we have to look at strategies to say, well, how am I going to cope going forward?
Said, let them eat cake. The French Revolution was off with their heads. And studies have found that inequality around the world is now, in the Western world, is worse than it was pre-French Revolution. When we get to a situation where governments continue to raise taxes, isn't it meant to be the case that the people push back?
Well, I'm actually hoping so. And I hope I see in Australia this $3 million taxing unrealised gains. Oh, we're only taxing the super rich. I'm really hoping that people see that, yeah, that's how income tax started. We started taxing the rich and then everybody started paying it. It's a way of creeping a Trojan horse new tax into the system. They're going to come for us and they're not going to give us refunds. If these gains aren't realised, they're not going to give them back. How can the people of Australia sit there and go, oh, this is okay? Because they're hoping that we're going, oh, well, it's only for a few rich. But it won't be. They'll come for us eventually. They'll come for everyone.
In New Zealand, property prices are tanking. They're flattening, they're declining, and there's a concern that the same thing could happen in Australia. It feels like the government of Australia, state and federal, are able to get away with more because property prices are still out of control high. What would happen, do you think? Would that be the straw that breaks the camel's back if property prices start to decline?
I think so. Look, ultimately there's so much lending, borrowing in Australia that's hooked against assets. Now, if those asset values start to fall...
And the banks come a-knocking.
That's right. So historically, whenever we've gone into crises, the banks just go a bit quiet and don't come a-knocking. But if these crises extend out, then all of a sudden they will have to come a-knocking, and superannuation balances and anyone that's leveraged into their investments is really going to struggle going forward.
Let's talk about New World Wealth.
Yeah, I want to be positive about this.
Yeah, well, it feels like we've had a lot of things happen, right? We've been marched down this path of no longer a cash society. Everything's on credit. When you go and do your tax return, it's auto-filled. They know everything these days.
They know more about you than you know about you.
Which is very much true.
It is true.
Yeah. So when we're at that stage and it then feels like we're starting to be fleeced, what can we do to be positive?
Well, the thing is we are being fleeced. So it's just a matter of saying, well, they are the new rules going forward. What am I going to do? So I go around diversity. Diversity and deployment. So diversity is a little bit in superannuation, a little bit in the family home, a little bit in a share portfolio, a little bit in a business, a little bit in a side hustle, a little bit everywhere. The bigger the bucket, the more likelihood they're going to come for that big bucket. So a little bit across the board is the best way to deal with it. But I think the biggest issue is, well, the biggest thing we should be considering is people of my age generally built up wealth, and then our later years we deploy our wealth into our legacies. For me, it's biodiversity. I love nature, you know, all those sorts of things. But I think you've got to go, well, no, if I build it up into a bucket, I'm never going to get that opportunity to deploy it because it'll be grabbed at some point beforehand. So you've got to start to deploy as you go along. So it doesn't matter if you have minimal wealth or a fair bit of wealth, you've got to start saying, well, I'm not trying to build a bucket, I'm trying to build those experiences, I'm trying to build that sustainability, I'm trying to support that cause. Even if it's none of that and it's just, I'm trying to build experiences. Travel. You know, there's nothing happier than a tax-deductible life. You know, link your travel and experiences in with your career or your business. If you like drag racing, I don't know, I don't really like drag racing, but go sponsor the event. You know, be a part of these things, because building that bucket to have the experiences later isn't going to happen. You have to do it as you go along. So be positive about this.
Yeah, it's funny. It's been the life that I've always run, right? I've always kind of looked at, I've watched friends who are dealing with their grandparents' houses while they've gone into aged care facilities. And because they have a house, it's so much more complicated than if they've been renting their entire life. And I look at the challenges there and think, you know, we're in a society that we don't want anyone to fall, but having wealth no longer really helps.
No, and I feel a bit of a victim. I'm not a victim, I can assure you, but I'm that in-between group. If you look at the boomers to a degree, they seem to have got through without being too scathed by all of this.
Well, they've had a great time.
But we're still following the pathway in our generation of the boomers. Well, it's not going to be the same way. Where the younger generation that you're a part of and below, they've actually seen what happens with an accumulation of wealth and they're avoiding it. So the in-betweeners, myself, we've got to adapt fast. We've got to go, well, actually, that future that the past generations have had is not going to be there. It's actually going to get more complicated and harder and taxing if you go there and say, well, I'm going to move to deployment right now.
What about for those who are around my age, so 40s, and they're thinking about early retirement, and the idea for early retirement is to build up wealth between your mid-30s and your early 50s to be able to get out there to enjoy your life so you don't retire and then suddenly get diagnosed with something.
That's right, that's a fire-up strategy, isn't it? You know, build up as much as you can. And probably work yourself to a bone. I think putting aside all those medical issues and life issues and things that can happen and change that equation very rapidly at all, we're heading to a geopolitical position that's going to change that. So if you build a pile of wealth for your 40s and then think that's going to get you through to 100, forget it. They're coming for it in so many different ways that it's not going to sustain you. So you've got to look at it a little bit different. I believe pace yourself, work in a career, a job, a business, whatever that you like to do for fun, and keep doing it. I will never retire. I hope to be invoicing the morning of the afternoon that I pass away.
I get a sense that you and I are going to be sitting here in 50 years' time.
Whether anyone's listening to us then, we might be there good advice, but it's bad advice or whatever it might be. But ultimately, let's change our thinking a little bit. Don't look at past generations and say that's going to be the future. It's not. You can't get between a politician and a bucket of money. The last buckets remaining are yours. They're coming for it. Change your mindset. Move to diversity, a little bit in everything, and deployment as you go along rather than waiting to the end of your life.
Famous last words from Dr. Steven Enticott. I will be invoicing on the morning of the day that I die. What if you'll never know if they pay? Surely as a tax accountant, you'll hang around to see whether or not the money lands in the account.
That's right. I might not be doing tax accounting then, I might be doing biodiversity work, but I think that's the mindset you move to. If you're going to be stressed about your retirement and will you have enough, well, don't retire. Just keep working in what you like to do for fun.
All right, Dr. Steven Enticott, of course, host of Money Matters right here on Ticker. Check it out. Head to the show page on the Ticker News website. We'll see you soon.